When visibility replaces effectiveness. You finish the work, but the dashboard doesn't move, so the room treats it like it didn't happen. You choose the task that will show up cleanly in the weekly report, not the one that would actually remove the bottleneck. You can feel the trade-off in your calendar, doing the job versus proving you did the job. This is the friction of modern competence. When performance is translated into signals, and the signals become the thing people trust. The stakes are not just productivity. The stakes are what counts as real, what gets attention, and what kind of person the system trains you to become. Visibility replaces effectiveness when incentives reward the proxy more reliably than the purpose, and the proxy drifts from evidence into identity. This sermon will not claim that measurement is bad, or that visibility is always vanity, or that anyone needs to be the villain for distortion to occur. It will claim something narrower and harder, that whenever a system treats a number, a status, or a trace as the safest substitute for judgment, people will adapt, rationally, and the adaptation will slowly reassign meaning. The problem is not measurement. The problem is measurement becoming the dominant language of trust, and then pretending it is neutral. Start with plain terms, because confusion is how capture hides. A metric is a number used to summarize something. How many tasks closed, how fast a response time, how many units shipped, how many hours logged. Metrics are useful because they compress reality into something comparable. But compression is also loss. A metric cannot carry the whole story. It chooses what counts and what doesn't. A proxy is the stand-in the system uses when it cannot measure what it truly wants. The system wants good work, but it measures tickets closed. It wants care, but it measures time spent. It wants learning, but it measures test scores. A proxy is not a lie. It is a compromise. The danger is forgetting that it is a compromise. Incentive is the reward or penalty attached to behavior, including money, status, safety, promotion, access, praise, and relief from scrutiny. Incentives do not require greed to work. They only require that people notice what leads to fewer problems and more opportunities. Incentives are the rails of behavior. Capture is what happens when a tool or process designed to serve a goal starts serving itself, when the measurement system becomes an end, when the reporting apparatus becomes the product, when compliance becomes the definition of success. Capture is not always a conspiracy. Often it is a gradual shift in what gets funded, staffed, and trusted. Now name a few assumptions explicitly. First, the system cannot see everything. It has limited attention. It therefore selects a small set of visible indicators. They respond to constraints. When the system says, "This is what we can verify," people invest in what can be verified. Third, competence is social. It is not only about what you can do, it is about what others believe you can do. Visibility is not optional, it's part of the contract. But visibility can be the evidence of value, or it can become the substitute for value. Fourth, measurement is not merely descriptive, it is generative. When you attach incentives to a proxy, the proxy reshapes behavior. The proxy becomes a target. The target becomes an identity. This is how a scoreboard turns into a religion without anyone intending it. Here's the crucial distinction. Meaning is the purpose you would still serve if no one were watching. Metric is the trace you can show when someone asks, "Did you do it?" Meaning is wide and contextual. Metric is narrow and comparable. Metrics can support meaning when they remain subordinate. Metrics replace meaning when they become the primary basis of trust. Consider a simple example. A team wants reliability. Reliability is not one thing, it is a texture. Fewer surprises, clearer handoffs, less rework, calmer emergencies. But the system can't measure texture easily, so it chooses a proxy. Time to resolve incidents. That proxy has value, yet it also has a shadow. It can be improved by quick fixes that create future failures, by redefining what counts as an incident, by transferring responsibility, by avoiding complex cases. Or take learning. A person wants to understand a topic deeply, to transfer it to new problems. The system chooses a proxy, scores on a test. Scores have value. But if incentives attach, status, ranking, access, then the score becomes the object, and the learning becomes whatever most efficiently moves the score. The question, when does visibility replace effectiveness, is therefore not mystical. It's mechanical. It happens at the moment the system treats the proxy as safer than judgment, and the moment people treat the proxy as safer than reality. We should also separate two kinds of visibility. One is diagnostic visibility, information used to find problems, learn, and adjust. It can be private, temporary, and exploratory. It tolerates nuance. The other is evaluative visibility, information used to rank, reward, punish, and allocate. It must be legible to decision makers who are not close to the work. It prefers simplicity and stability. When diagnostic visibility dominates, measurement is a flashlight. When evaluative visibility dominates, measurement becomes a courtroom. The same number can serve either role. The incentives decide which one it becomes. Finally, name what effectiveness means in this sermon. Effectiveness is producing the intended outcome, with acceptable trade-offs across time, not just producing a short-term signal. Effectiveness includes durability, spillovers, and the human costs of the path taken. A system that creates numbers without outcomes is not effective. It is busy. That's the ground. Now the tension. The system wants to know but cannot know directly. It measures, it rewards. People adapt. The proxy drifts. The system trusts the drift because it is visible. That's the loop. The core paradox is simple. What gets measured gets served. What gets served gets distorted. Not because people are uniquely corrupt, but because they are constrained. Measurement begins as an attempt to reduce uncertainty. Leaders, managers, committees, reviewers, any structure making decisions at a distance need legible signals. They need something that can travel, a number, a chart, a status label. The proxy is a bridge across distance, but distance creates a second problem. The further you are from the work, the more you rely on proxies. The more you rely on proxies, the more you reward proxy performance. The more the work reshapes itself to look good from far away. The bridge becomes a toll road. The toll is paid in reality. Here are two distinct incentive loops that make this drift predictable. Incentive loop 1, the reporting loop. 1. The system requests updates because it fears being surprised. 2. People provide updates that are legible and safe because ambiguity is punished. 3. The system rewards the most legible updates because they reduce the system's anxiety. 4. People learn that legibility is competence, so they allocate time to packaging. 5. The system sees more packaging and believes it is seeing more progress. This loop does not require anyone to lie. It only requires that I don't know yet is treated as weakness, and that here is a clean story is treated as strength. The system then trains narration over navigation. 1. The system measures output because it wants momentum. 2. People increase visible throughput by choosing tasks that are small, easy, and countable. 3. Hard tasks that reduce future load are postponed because they are slow and risky. 4. Future load increases, making the system more desperate for momentum. 5. The system tightens measurement to stop slacking, which further punishes long horizon work. Again, no villain required. The loop is enough. The constraint is enough. Now place the individual inside these loops. If you are evaluated by a proxy, you will protect yourself by controlling that proxy. This is not always cynical. It can be basic survival. When the system says, your future depends on this number, it is asking you to treat the number as realer than the work. The number becomes a risk surface. People manage risk. This is how visibility becomes a kind of currency. Currency is useful because it allows comparison. But currency also creates a market, and markets get gamed because gaming is often the cheapest way to win. Gaming here does not mean cheating in the dramatic sense. It means optimizing the measured dimension at the expense of the unmeasured dimensions. If the system does not measure durability, durability becomes an externality. If it does not measure trust, trust becomes an externality. If it does not measure the cost of interruptions, interruptions become free. Now we can name two failure modes, one at the individual level and one at the system level, because the distortions appear at different scales. Individual level failure mode, identity capture by the dashboard. When competence is repeatedly translated into a proxy, a person can start living inside the proxy. The day becomes a hunt for visible wins. Work becomes a sequence of artifacts optimized for inspection. The person does not merely do tasks. The person becomes the kind of worker the measurement system can recognize. The cost is subtle. Attention shifts from what problem matters to what problem can I prove I solved. The person may even feel productive, because the proxy provides a steady drip of completion, but the sense of progress is now rented from the metric. The person's judgment atrophies because the system has outsourced judgment to a scoreboard. System-level failure mode, institutional proxy drift. Over time, the organization's language changes. Meetings shift from describing reality to describing the representation of reality. The system starts hiring for proxy fluency, people who can produce clean dashboards, manage narratives, and keep metrics green. This is not because such skills are useless, it is because they are legible, and legibility is rewarded. As this happens, the institution becomes brittle. It cannot tolerate messy truths. It cannot admit uncertainty early. It becomes skilled at reporting, and less skilled at sensing. And because it rewards the production of acceptable numbers, it invites a quiet kind of rent. Attention and time spent feeding the proxy ecosystem, rather than improving the underlying system. Now a crucial point. Good intentions do not prevent capture. A system can start with sincere aims, fairness, accountability, transparency, learning. It adds measurement to reduce bias, to make expectations clear, to protect people from arbitrary judgment. These are good intentions. Yet once the metrics are tied to rewards, the same apparatus becomes a site of negotiation. People bargain over definitions, edge cases, classifications, thresholds. They do this not because they are immoral, but because the stakes are real and the metric is now a gate. Then, administrators, also with good intentions, tighten rules to prevent manipulation. Tightening produces more compliance work, which favors those with more time, familiarity, and access to the process. The system becomes more objective on paper, while becoming more captured in practice. The apparatus grows, and the purpose shrinks. Good intentions build the first scaffold. Incentives decide what the scaffold becomes. This is the paradox of visibility. The more you demand proof, the more you incentivize performance. Proof is not free. Proof has a cost, and the cost is paid in attention. The system says, "Show me." People respond, "Then I will spend time making it show." The system then sees the showing and thinks it has seen the doing. Now introduce the role of attention and status, because they are the soft incentives that often matter more than formal rewards. When a dashboard is displayed, discussed, circulated, it becomes a stage. People learn what gets discussed and what gets ignored. The discussed becomes important. The ignored becomes nice to have. Over time, the dashboard doesn't merely reflect values, it sets values. This is not philosophical, it is operational. And because attention is finite, the dashboard becomes a filter for reality. Problems outside the filter struggle to exist socially. They can be felt by those doing the work, but they cannot travel upward with force. If a problem cannot be graphed, it becomes a whisper. That is how visibility replaces effectiveness. Effectiveness becomes a private experience. Visibility becomes the public truth. Now, we should not romanticize the alternative. A world with no measurement is a world with arbitrary authority, selective memory, and hidden failure. Measurement can protect, but protection has trade-offs. The question is whether the system remembers those trade-offs or pretends they aren't there. Consider how proxies become targets. At first, the proxy is correlated with the goal. More tests written correlates with quality. More client calls returned correlates with care. More documentation correlates with clarity. But when the proxy becomes a target, the correlation breaks. Tests become shallow, calls become rushed, documentation becomes performative. The system then doubles down because it believes the proxy is the goal. The system's belief becomes a constraint. Reality becomes negotiable. The metric becomes law. A metric is a knife. It cuts both ways. It can cut through ambiguity and expose a pattern. It can also cut away context and leave you with a clean wound you mistake for clarity. Now watch the final twist. When measurement becomes identity, people descend it. If your credibility is built on a dashboard, you will resist changes to the dashboard. If your status is built on a reporting process, you will resist simplification. If your organization is praised for transparency, it will resist admitting that transparency has become theater. This is not hypocrisy, it is structural self-preservation. The system becomes attached to the visible because the visible is what it can control. The unseen is what might embarrass it. So the tension is not between honest people and dishonest people. The tension is between the world as it is, complex, contextual, time-lagged, and the world as the system can safely acknowledge, simplified, immediate, comparable. Visibility lives in the second world. Effectiveness lives in the first. When the second world becomes the only world that counts, visibility has replaced effectiveness. The consequences are rarely dramatic at first. They are second-order effects, shifts in behavior that feel reasonable locally, but accumulate into something costly. First consequence, work selection changes. When proxies drive reward, people choose work that produces clean traces. Preventative maintenance loses to flashy fixes. Slow craftsmanship loses to rapid throughput. Relationship building loses to measurable transactions. This is not laziness, It is adaptation to constraints. The trade-off is temporal. The system borrows from the future to pay the present with good-looking numbers. The interest rate is rework, fragility, and surprise. Second consequence, language shifts from truth to legibility. People stop describing what is happening and start describing what can be defended. Ambiguity becomes dangerous. Nuance becomes a liability. The result is not just dishonesty, it is impoverished perception. When the only safe statements are those that fit the reporting template, the system literally cannot speak about certain realities. Third consequence, risk moves into the shadows. If a metric penalizes visible failures, failures become invisible. People reclassify issues, delay acknowledgement, route around categories, or keep problems informal. This is not always deliberate deceit. It can be an attempt to buy time. But the system pays for invisibility with late surprises. Here the trade-off is between early discomfort and late catastrophe. A system that punishes early truth will get late truth. Fourth consequence, capability is replaced by compliance. As measurement expands, more energy goes into documenting, formatting, aligning, and justifying. Some of this is valuable discipline, but beyond a threshold, documentation becomes rent, work done to satisfy the measurement apparatus rather than the mission. Rent is not only monetary, it is cognitive load, it is meeting time, it is the quiet exhaustion of translating life into boxes. The system often calls this accountability, but accountability has a cost curve. Past a certain point, you are no longer holding people accountable to outcomes. You are holding them accountable to the proxy. Fifth consequence, the center of gravity moves toward those who manage perception. When evaluative visibility dominates, the most rewarded skill is not making the system effective, it is making the system look effective. This selects for people who can produce narratives, control frames, and avoid measurable failure. Again, those skills are not inherently corrupt, but the selection effect matters. Over time, the institution becomes an organism optimized for appearing healthy under its own tests. The trade-off is epistemic. You gain stability of reporting and lose contact with ground truth. Sixth consequence, moral licensing through metrics. If the dashboard is green, people feel permitted to ignore what the dashboard does not show. The metric becomes a certificate of goodness. We hit the target becomes a substitute for asking, was it wise? This is how a system can act against its stated values while maintaining a feeling of virtue. This is not fear-mongering, it is ordinary human psychology under constraint. When a system provides a clear criterion for being good, people will cling to it because ambiguity is exhausting. Seventh consequence, the talent pipeline adapts. Newcomers learn what is rewarded. They learn which tasks are career safe, which failures are fatal, which efforts are invisible. They become fluent in the incentive environment. The system then interprets their behavior as culture and forgets it built the behavior. This is how proxy-driven systems persist. They reproduce themselves through training, promotion, and storytelling. Eighth consequence, effectiveness becomes expensive. To do the work that actually matters, people must now also do the work of making it visible. The cost of proof is added to the cost of production. The system then complains about overhead and introduces new efficiency metrics, which increases overhead further. The system starts to chase efficiency while paying hidden taxes. The trade-off is that you can have either dense measurement or cheap work, but rarely both. Measurement at scale consumes capacity. Ninth consequence, relationships degrade into transactions. In a high measurement environment, trust is replaced by verification. Verification is sometimes necessary, but when verification becomes the default, people stop extending good faith. They stop sharing incomplete ideas. They stop admitting uncertainty. They stop taking the kinds of risks that create real learning. The system then loses the informal coordination that makes complex work possible. It gains control and loses adaptability. 10th consequence, the system narrows its moral imagination. Because proxies are simplified, they tend to privilege what is countable, immediate, and attributable. Many of the most important outcomes are none of those. Resilience, long-term health of a process, the development of judgment, the reduction of suffering, the creation of trust. When those outcomes lack a proxy, they become optional, not because anyone hates them, but because the system cannot justify them in its own language. The organization becomes fluent in what it can count and mute about what it cannot. Now return to the core question: when does visibility replace effectiveness? It happens when the second-order effects become the primary operating logic, when work selection is driven by visibility, when language is shaped for defensibility, when risk is managed through classification rather than prevention, when compliance is treated as competence. Then the system is no longer using measurement. Measurement is using the system. And because these changes are incremental, they feel like maturity. We are getting more rigorous. We are becoming more accountable. We are scaling. Those stories can be true. They can also be cover stories for proxy drift. The system's quietest transformation is this: it begins to treat the absence of a metric as the absence of a problem. That is the moment effectiveness has been demoted. Not eliminated. People still care, people still try, but demoted. Effectiveness becomes a personal ethic, while visibility becomes the institutional fact. The cost is not only wasted effort. The cost is a world where reality must audition to be acknowledged. So what do we do with this if we refuse neat answers? First, we hold a disciplined distinction. Proxies are not purpose. A proxy can be informative and still be insufficient. A dashboard can be useful and still be a stage. That is not cynicism, it is literacy. Second, notice the emotional signature of proxy capture. It often feels like relief when you can point to a number and stop thinking. It feels like safety when you can produce an artifact and avoid scrutiny. It feels like control when uncertainty is converted into a chart. Those feelings are understandable. They are also how the proxy recruits you. Third, observe that measurement is never merely technical. Every metric encodes values: what is worth counting, what is acceptable collateral, what time horizon matters, what kinds of labor are recognized. No system is neutral. Every system makes some work visible and other work ghost-like. Fourth, remember that transparency is not the same as truth. Transparency can mean more surfaces to inspect, which can reduce abuse. It can also mean more surfaces to perform, which can increase theater. The difference is in incentives, whether visibility is used to learn or to rank. Fifth, accept that trade-offs cannot be eliminated, only chosen and paid for. If you want legibility at scale, you will compress reality. If you compress reality, you will create externalities. If you create externalities, you must decide whether you will acknowledge them or let them accumulate. There is no pure state here. There is only a constant negotiation between the convenience of the proxy and the stubbornness of the world. And maybe the deepest discomfort is this: visibility often wins because it is shareable. Effectiveness can be quiet, local, and slow. Visibility is portable. It travels up hierarchies, across teams, into comparisons. Systems built on attention will favor what travels. So the question becomes less, how do we remove proxies, and more, what kind of attention do we train? If attention is trained to chase legible signals, then the system will become a signal factory. If attention is trained to tolerate ambiguity long enough to learn, then proxies can remain tools rather than masters. But even that is not a solution. It is a lens. Lenses do not rescue you. They only sharpen what you can see. Let the core question remain alive. When does visibility replace effectiveness? It replaces it when the proxy becomes the safest way to survive, the fastest way to win, and the most credible way to be believed. It replaces it when people stop asking, quietly and repeatedly, what is this metric unable to notice? There is no final safeguard against proxy drift. There is only ongoing reflection as a practice, returning again and again to the incentives, the constraints, the rents, the externalities, not to purify the system, but to stay awake inside it.